Christopher, no ambulance. We need Nancy to keep working. It's her fault for neglecting her health in the first place. She should just tough it out. Daniel said this unbelievable thing while Nancy was suffering, looking pale. I felt intense anger at Daniel, who prioritized his reputation over his subordinate's health, and I found myself saying, I'll translate in Nancy's place. Of course, Daniel laughed at my words. Sorbonne University, really? If you insist, I guess I have no choice. Hearing Daniel's hopeless words, I made a decision. I finally decided to abandon my policy of not showing off my abilities and start fighting back against Daniel. I haven't told you, Daniel, but I'm a Sorbonne University grad. Sorbonne University, really? I saw Daniel freeze for a moment. My name is Christopher Franks. I'm 43 years old. I've lived a hedonistic life, doing only what I liked since I was young, so I've never really had any romantic ties. Thanks to that, I'm still single at this age. My friends from school have all gone on to build happy families. Of course, sometimes I feel envious when I see them, but more often I think, there's no way I could do that, and shrink back. It's a pathetic story, even to myself. Normally, you'd expect parents to push for marriage, but my parents never say anything like that. Instead, they give unusual advice like, rushed marriages never end well, or enjoy your single life more. Thanks to my free-spirited parents, I've been able to enjoy my 40s without feeling any pressure to get married. Right now, I work at an advertising agency. I've always had a strong admiration for the advertising industry. So when I was job hunting right after graduation, I set my sights on it without hesitation. But of course, it's not a world where you can get hired just because you admire it. I was spectacularly rejected. I had been so sure I'd get accepted, but when my top choice, a major ad agency, rejected me, I was devastated. I lost all motivation at that point and decided to quit job hunting and go back home. Seeing me completely dejected and like a shell of myself, my dad made a suggestion. He asked me to help out at our family's French restaurant. You see, my dad is the third-generation owner of our French restaurant. And at that time, there was talk of relocating and renewing the place. That's when my dad thought of having me handle the advertising for the new restaurant. At first, I wasn't enthusiastic about it. But working with my dad brought one interesting discovery after another, and it felt refreshing. Especially in communication, I learned a lot from my dad. For example, whether I was giving the precise answers people wanted, how to deal with someone who didn't speak French, and the best tempo for a comfortable conversation, and so on. Realizing how thoughtfully my dad communicated, I finally understood why I failed at getting a job. If conversations were a game of catch, in my interviews, I was arrogantly throwing balls that no one could catch. I owe it to my dad for making me realize that. When my dad hurt his back and had to leave the shop to his apprentice, I decided to pursue the dream I had once given up on. I applied for a mid-career position at an ad agency and got hired when I was 40. While I was excited about the new environment, reality wasn't so sweet. I finally joined the ad agency I had always admired. And I made sure not to show off my abilities like I did when I was a fresh graduate. I worked hard without showing it, always finishing my tasks perfectly without anyone noticing. That became my motto. Remembering how my dad worked, I pursued my ideal way of working in my own way. From now on, I will think about others when communicating and always stay humble. By doing so, I believe my relationships will go smoothly, and I'll get along well with everyone at my new job. I believed that, but reality was not so simple. No matter how much I tried to reach out, there was someone I couldn't get along with. That person's name was Daniel Anderson. He was technically my boss. Daniel is a guy around my age who joined the ad agency as a new graduate. He's very elitist and generally looks down on everyone around him. As someone who was hired mid-career, I quickly became Daniel's target. It all started with an interaction like this. Christopher, how old are you again? I'm 40. Are you serious? You're the same age as me. How did you think you could join our company at that age? Being a mid-career hire is basically a dead end for promotions. Daniel laughed and snorted at me condescendingly. But I'm not one to be discouraged by something like this. I responded cheerfully, unaffected by Daniel's attacks. Actually, I aimed for the advertising industry right out of college, but unfortunately I didn't get the job. This mid-career recruitment was my last chance, so I'm truly grateful to have been hired. You're pretty persistent, aren't you? I could never do something so embarrassing. So, what have you been doing since you failed at job hunting? You weren't unemployed all this time, were you? Daniel crossed his arms arrogantly and smirked at me. He just couldn't help but look down on me. I gave Daniel a practiced smile I had mastered while working at the French restaurant and answered him. Of course, I wasn't unemployed. Until last year, I was helping out at my family's French restaurant. Although I didn't have the talent to make sushi, I mainly worked on advertising and management. What? Your family's French restaurant? That doesn't count as work experience. It's no different from being unemployed. I can't believe you'd admit that so boldly. I'd be too ashamed to tell anyone. I'd keep it a secret forever. I can't believe a sushi shop kid managed to get into our company. No. I was at a loss for words. Being mocked for my dad's French restaurant left me mentally shaken. Daniel continued speaking gleefully. Christopher, you might brag about working hard on advertising and management for your family business, but that experience is useless here. Given that you were rejected as a new graduate, you must not have graduated from a decent university. And at 40, with no proper work history. You'd be better off going back home to train in French meal. Everyone has their place, you know. No, I want to succeed at this company. I believe the experience I gained working in my family business will be valuable here. I look forward to your guidance. I managed to force out my response. However, I was too upset to fake a smile, so I put my head down deeply to avoid showing Daniel my expression. Daniel, pleased with my apology, added a snide remark as he left. Do your best. Though, no matter how hard you try, a third-rate person remains third-rate. Since that incident, Daniel has kept a close eye on me, constantly calling me out and asserting his dominance. He's probably using me as an outlet for his stress. However, I wasn't the only one Daniel looked down on. Although I was his main target, and therefore the most noticeable, Daniel had a habit of attacking anyone he didn't like. His targets were usually mid-career hires or those with lower academic backgrounds than his own. Daniel, with his elitist mindset, had a clear standard for his subordinates, and anyone who fell short of that, regardless of their background, became a target. Daniel even created his own checklist, which he handed out to his direct subordinates on their first day. Every day, he rigorously checked to ensure they weren't violating any of the items on the list. The checklist mainly covered things like grooming and language, but it was overly detailed and heavily influenced by Daniel's personal preferences. For example, it specified the brands of suits, shirts, and ties to wear, and gave instructions on the proper amount and application of cologne and hair products. It clearly went beyond the scope of company policy. Because Daniel's standards were so subjective, many employees were unfairly criticized and dominated. Of course, the subordinates voiced their opposition, saying it was too much. But Daniel never changed his behavior, and the company never reprimanded him. The rumor that Daniel had influence with the executives might actually be true. Every day, Daniel would call me to his desk and insult me as failure or incompetent in front of everyone. Most of the time, I was the only one who had to endure this, but sometimes Daniel wasn't satisfied with just berating me. In those times, unfortunately, the person who often became his next target was Nancy Smith. Nancy's job wasn't in advertising sales like ours. She was Daniel's personal interpreter. Her role was crucial, interpreting for Daniel during his dealings with foreign clients. Despite being indispensable, Daniel was extremely harsh on Nancy. On days when deals didn't go through, Daniel would yell, "Nancy, it's your fault. We lost the deal because your interpreting was terrible. An interpreter dragging me down is unacceptable. How are you going to take responsibility for this?" Even when scolded unfairly, Nancy wouldn't say anything back and would just wait for Daniel's anger to subside. Because of this, Nancy's complexion seemed to get worse by the day. And then, a major incident happened. It was the day Daniel was heading out for a negotiation with an overseas client. Our entire team had worked on the project, and if successful, it could result in a $500 million contract. Naturally, Daniel was determined to close the deal himself and was more on edge than usual. He watched over the team to ensure no one made mistakes and placed an unreasonable amount of pressure on Nancy. With every word Daniel said, Nancy's face grew paler. By the way, the ones attending the negotiation with the client were Daniel, his favorite subordinate, and Nancy, who served as their interpreter. That day, I was ordered to accompany them as the driver, so I was supposed to wait in the car. Since I was also involved in the project, I wanted to be present at the negotiation, but since I wasn't chosen to be part of the team, there was nothing I could do. I decided to quietly fulfill my duty as the driver. As I was thinking this and we arrived at our destination, something strange happened in the car. Oh! Nancy, who was sitting in the passenger seat, suddenly covered her mouth with a handkerchief and leaned forward in pain. "Nancy, what's wrong?" "It's okay." When I looked over in surprise, Nancy replied while coughing. She said she was fine, but she clearly wasn't. Feeling guilty, I forcefully checked her condition. When I moved her hand away from her mouth, I saw that the handkerchief Nancy was holding was stained bright red. "You're obviously not fine. We need to get you to a hospital right away." "It's okay. I'm fine." "You can't push yourself. I'm calling an ambulance right now." As I pulled my phone out of my pocket, my arm was suddenly grabbed from behind. It was, of course, Daniel who stopped me. Even though the two in the back seat must have noticed Nancy's condition, Daniel, instead of showing concern, said something outrageous. "Christopher, no ambulance. We need Nancy to keep working. It's her own fault for neglecting her health. She should just tough it out." "That's impossible. Don't you understand? This isn't something she can just tough out. Nancy herself said she's fine. Don't let the driver meddle. Have you forgotten what day it is? This is a $500 million negotiation. Without an interpreter, it's pointless. Are you trying to embarrass me?" Daniel's yelling echoed through the cramped car. Nancy, still suffering, kept her head down and trembled. Feeling intense anger at Daniel, who prioritized his pride over his subordinate's health, I blurted out, "I'll translate for Nancy." Of course, Daniel laughed at my words. "What nonsense is a low-educated person like you spouting? Come up with a better lie. There's no way you can replace Nancy. I'd rather trust a monkey than you." "If you say so, I guess I have no choice." Hearing Daniel's hopeless words, I made a decision. I finally decided to abandon my policy of not showing off my abilities and start fighting back against Daniel. "I never mentioned this to you, Daniel, but I'm a Sorbonne University grad." "Sorbonne University? Really?" I saw Daniel freeze for a moment. Not missing this opportunity, I mercilessly taunted him. "What? Is it possible that the elite has never heard of it? It's a university in Paris, France." "I know that much. I'm saying there's no way you're a Sorbonne University grad." "It's true. If you doubt me, you can verify it with the company later. But right now, you don't have that luxury. Nancy can't work, and even if you call another interpreter, they won't make it in time for the negotiation. Having lived in France for over 20 years, including my student days, I can handle the interpreting for you." I looked Daniel straight in the eye, full of confidence. Daniel, on the other hand, groaned with a grim expression. He still couldn't believe my words. Over 20 years in France, don't lie, before joining this company. You were at your family's French restaurant. Yes, I helped at the family French restaurant. But it was in France. When I failed at job hunting, my dad decided to expand overseas. It was a risky move at first, but now we have multiple successful locations. I handled all those negotiations in French, so I should be useful for today's meeting. We don't have time, Daniel. Decide what you're going to do. Fine, Christopher. You do the interpreting, but don't do anything unnecessary. Got it? Daniel reluctantly agreed, glaring at me from the driver's seat. Even though he didn't like it, Daniel realized he had no other options. After that, we immediately called an ambulance for Nancy, and we headed to the meeting as planned. The negotiation with the client went better than expected. Having spent nearly half my life in France, interpreting wasn't particularly difficult for me. Plus, I was part of the project team. Thanks to Daniel dumping tasks like research and document preparation on me, I knew the presentation content inside out. So, I was able to supplement Daniel's words and add my own insights while interpreting. Daniel looked at me suspiciously, but he couldn't point out any mistakes since he didn't understand what I was translating. As the negotiation neared its end, an unexpected question came from the client. Daniel hurriedly checked the documents, but of course the information wasn't there. I had prepared the documents, so I knew it for sure. After a slight cough, Daniel turned to the client with an apologetic expression. We apologize. We'll need to take your question back and get back to you with an answer. It was a stupid response. But this is why some people in panic does often fail. It's essential to settle things on the spot. Convinced of this, I decided not to translate Daniel's words and took it upon myself to answer the client's question. I calculated the amount on the spot. Of course, I explained that this was a rough estimate and the exact amount would be determined later. This immediately turned the conversation in a favorable direction, and we successfully closed the $500 million deal. After the negotiation ended, Daniel predictably confronted me. Apparently, he didn't like that I had engaged with the client without his approval. Speaking rapidly in the English so the clients in the meeting room wouldn't understand, he insulted me relentlessly. Christopher, I told you not to do anything extra. What do you think you're doing acting on your own? You're just supposed to interpret my words. Nobody wants your opinion, and yet you arrogantly answered, just wait until we get back. I'm sorry, but if we had taken the question back with us, we wouldn't have closed this deal. That's just your opinion. What if you said something wrong and the deal fell through? Can you take responsibility for that? Are you trying to ruin my career? Don't mess with me. Daniel's tirade showed no signs of stopping. He seemed to have forgotten that we were at the client's office. As I wondered what to do, one of the clients approached us and greeted us cheerfully. And it was in perfectly pronounced the English. Thank you very much for today. Let me introduce myself again. I'm Frank. It was a wonderful presentation. We look forward to a long and prosperous relationship with you. English. Seeing Daniel at a loss for words, I answered Frank instead. Thank you for your time as well. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to work with you, Frank. Christopher, you speak native-level French. Your pronunciation is very clear. How long did you live overseas? I lived in France for about 20 years since my university days. You also speak very beautiful the English, Frank. As Frank and I chatted pleasantly, Daniel stood there trembling. All the insults he had hurled at me earlier were clearly heard by Frank, our client. It's no wonder he was shaken. After exchanging pleasantries with me, Frank turned back to Daniel and said, I will report your comments to my boss. This includes your poor response to our questions and your disrespect towards Christopher. The presentation was great, but you understood less than half of what Christopher presented. Are you really a leader? I don't want to work with someone who has no respect. No, you misunderstand. I was just guiding my subordinate. I don't know English. Well then. Frank ruthlessly ignored Daniel's excuses and informed his boss. As Frank had declared, Daniel was removed from the project. This incident led to Daniel rapidly losing his standing within the company. Following the report from Frank's boss, a series of accusations against Daniel began to surface. Among the accusers was, of course, Nancy, the interpreter who had been rushed to the hospital on the day of the negotiation. That day, Nancy was diagnosed with a severe gastric ulcer and was immediately hospitalized. It's almost certain that Daniel's repeated verbal abuse was the cause. When Nancy reported the mental anguish she had suffered after being discharged, more victims with similar stories started to come forward. Gastric ulcers and alopecia were just the beginning. Some employees had developed mental illnesses due to stress and had to take leave from work. The executives could no longer protect Daniel, and he was demoted and transferred to another department. This incident severely damaged Daniel's reputation with upper management, effectively ending his career advancement. For Daniel, who had been working solely for promotion, this punishment must have been a significant blow. Daniel was transferred to what is known as the banishment room, a marginal department with few people and tasks close to menial work. Because of his demotion, the subordinates Daniel once looked down upon now outranked him. One of these subordinates was Daniel's new boss, someone who Daniel had previously driven to a mental breakdown. Out of resentment for being sidelined, Daniel's new boss treated him like a punching bag. Daniel, with his high pride, couldn't bear the humiliation of being berated by a former subordinate. He started drowning his sorrows in beer at home. And recently, I heard that Daniel's wife left him, taking their children with her. My work life changed drastically in the opposite direction. Since closing the $500 million deal, people have had high expectations for me. Previously, I believed in excelling without standing out, but that was no longer possible. Although this wasn't my ideal way of working, I found the new lifestyle enjoyable. There was also a significant change in my personal life. I started dating Nancy Smith after receiving a passionate approach from her. Nancy had always admired how I stood up to Daniel's scolding without flinching. In her stressful, daily life of being unfairly yelled at, my presence had been a source of relief. She said she fell for me when I stepped in to interpret for her the day she collapsed with a gastric ulcer. However, Nancy is still in her 30s, making her about 10 years younger than me. Initially, I was hesitant about the age gap and turned down her proposal, but eventually I was persuaded by Nancy's persistence. She also had lived in France for a long time, so we quickly bonded. Things have progressed smoothly, and we are even planning to introduce each other to our parents, who live overseas. I feel like I've been smoothly led onto the path to marriage, but I don't think this kind of life is bad at all.